Introduction. The Ambush. The canyon was a hellscape of flame and blood, the narrow pass echoing with the screams of the dying and the clashing of steel. Fuertun's breath came in ragged gasps as he slashed through the chaos, his fiery hair whipping in the wind like a living flame. The heat was stifling, oppressive, but to Fuertun, it was an old friend, one he had long since learned to embrace. "Regroup! Hold the line!" Fuertun's voice rang out commanding yet strained. His men were scattered, some fighting desperately, others had already fallen. The enemy had come from all sides, outnumbering them, and it was clear this was no ordinary battle. It was a trap. Fuertun's eyes blazed as he surveyed the battlefield, his sword a blur of motion as he cut down an enemy soldier with a single swift stroke, the blade already scorching from the intense heat of the surrounding flames, seemed to blaze with an inner fire of its own, leaving trails of sparks in the air with every swing. Another enemy charged at him, and without hesitation Fuertun thrust his hand forward. Flames erupted from his palm, a roaring cone of fire that engulfed the soldier before he could even scream. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, but Fuertun did not flinch. This was war, and he had long since made peace with the brutality of it. An arrow pierced Fuertun's shoulder, the pain sharp and immediate. He stumbled, the force of the impact almost knocking him off his feet, but he did not falter. He could not afford to. With a grimace, he reached up and grabbed at the shaft and yanked it out. The wound already cauterizing from the heat radiating off his body. The rage inside him flared, his vision narrowing into a tunnel of red. The flames responded to his fury, swirling around him in a fiery halo. With a fierce cry, Fuertun swept his hand across the ground, and a wave of fire surged from his feet. Racing across the battlefield, enemy soldiers screamed as the flames consumed them, their armor glowing red hot, the metal warping and melting under the intense heat. One of his men fell nearby, a spear lodged in his side. Fuertun rushed to him, the fire within him blazing with renewed intensity. He knelt beside the soldier, placing his hand on the man's chest. "Stay with me," he growled, the flames in his eyes reflecting the desperation in his voice. With a gesture, Fuertun's hand glowed brighter, the heat radiating from it causing the air to shimmer. The metal spearhead embedded in the soldier's flesh began to glow, and with a hiss of steam it melted away, the wound cauterizing instantly. The soldier gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain. But the bleeding stopped, and Fuertun helped him to his feet. But there was no time to rest. The enemy was closing in, their numbers seemingly endless. Fuertun's mind raced, his heart pounding as he calculated their chances. They were slim. Too slim. The canyon was a death trap, and there was only one way out. "Fall back to me!" Fuertun roared, his voice cutting through the cacophony of battle. His men, battered and bloodied, began to rally around him, forming a tight circle. The enemy pressed in, a wave of steel and malice, but Fuertun stood tall, his flames burning brighter than ever. He could feel the fire within him reaching its peak. A raging inferno demanded to be unleashed. The pain was excruciating, searing through his veins like molten lava. But Fuertun embraced it, channeled it. With a fierce determination, he raised his arms into the sky, and the flame around him surged upward, forming a massive column of fire that shot into the air, illuminating the entire canyon in a hellish glow. The ground trembled, cracked, spreading as the heat intensified. With a final desperate cry, Fuertun brought his hands down, and the column of fire exploded outward in all directions. The shockwave knocked enemy soldiers off their feet, the flames incinerating everything in their path. But even as the inferno raged, Fuertun bent the fire around his men, focusing all his will on shielding them from the destruction he had unleashed. It took every ounce of his strength to keep the flames at bay, to twist them away from his comrades while still repelling the enemy. The effort was agonizing, a delicate dance between annihilation and protection, the fire eager to consume everything. But Fuertun would not let it. But it wasn't enough. The enemy kept coming, relentless, determined to finish what they had started. Fuertun's vision blurred, the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. But he couldn't stop now. His men were depending on him. The battle had become a nightmare of blood and fire. One by one, Fuertun's men fell. He had watched as Duran, always the first to charge in, was cut down by a pair of swords that slashed through his armor. Duran's cry of defiance turned into a gurgle as blood filled his lungs, and he collapsed, the light in his eyes extinguished. Next, Belcar, the quiet one, who had been with Fuertun since the beginning. Belcar fought with a calm precision, with every movement calculated, but even his skill couldn't save him when an arrow found the gap between his helmet and breastplate. Belcar's hand went to his throat, blood spilling between his fingers, as he sank to his knees, his eyes searching for Fuertun, seeking for one last moment of reassurance before he slumped to the ground. Wraith was taken down by a brutal axe swing, the weapon cleaving through his shield and into his chest. Wraith had always been the strongest, the one who could hold the line when others faltered. But now he lay in a broken heap, his lifeblood soaking the earth beneath him. Fuertun's heart grew heavier with each loss, the fire within him flaring hotter, fueled by his anguish and rage. But it was Frant's fall that broke something inside him. Frant, his last remaining soldier, fought off 3 warriors with a ferocity born of desperation. He was a blur of motion, his sword flashing as he parried and struck. But the odds were too great. An enemy spear found its mark, piercing Frant's chest. Fuertun's heart lurched as he saw the life drain from Frant's eyes, the soldier collapsing to the ground. "No!" Fuertun's scream tore through the battlefield as he burned away the men who had killed Frant, their screams of terror lost in the roar of the flames. He fell to his knees beside Frant, cradling the dying soldier in his arms. Frant's breath was shallow, each exhale a struggle. His eyes, so once full of life and determination, were now dull, but they focused on Fuertun with a lingering spark of recognition. "Captain?" Frant's voice was barely a whisper, his lips stained with blood. "I'm here. Frant, I'm here," Fuertun said, his voice breaking as he held Frant closer. The fire within him surged, but he fought to keep it from consuming them both. He could feel Frant's life slipping away, the warmth of his body fading. "Did we win?" Frant asked, his gaze searching Fuertun's face for the answer. Fuertun swallowed the lump in his throat, forcing a smile. "We fought well, Frant. Better than anyone could have asked." Frant gave a weak nod, a faint smile touching his lips before his eyes closed one last time. Fuertun felt the moment when Frant's breath stopped, the last of his strength leaving his body. For a moment the world stood still, the sounds of battle faded, replaced by the deafening silence of loss. Fuertun looked down at Frant's lifeless form, his heart breaking. His men, his brothers, were gone. Fuertun's screams of rage and grief echoed through the canyon, the fire around him flaring dangerously. Frant was dead. They were all dead. His men, his brothers. The ones he had fought beside. Bled beside, they were gone. And now, with no one left to protect, the fire inside him surged unrestrained. The flames roared higher, responding to his anguish, his fury. He wanted to unleash it all, to burn the entire canyon to ash, to make the enemy pay for every drop of blood they had spilled. The fire begged to be let loose, to turn everything in its path to cinders. But as he reached for his oil flask, desperate to feed the flames with the fuel they craved, his fingers closed around nothing. The flask was empty. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There was no fuel left, no way to stoke the fire to the level he needed. The raw energy coursing through him was dwindling, and he knew it wouldn't be enough to destroy them all. Not like he wanted to. He felt a bitter taste of defeat, a helplessness that gnawed at his soul. He wanted to fight, to unleash the full fury of his flames, but the fire needed fuel and his body had none left to give. There was only one option left. He could still escape, but it would take everything he had. Fuertun looked to the sky, his eyes narrowing. He hated flying, despised the agony it brought. But there was no other way. He could feel the enemy closing in, their numbers overwhelming. They were going to finish him off, just like they had finished his men. "Forgive me," he whispered, though there was no one left to hear it. He had failed them, failed to save them, but he couldn't let their deaths be in vain. He had to live, to carry on their memory, to make sure someone knew of their sacrifice. He drew in a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The flames surged around him, hotter, fiercer, as if they knew what was coming. He closed his eyes, feeling the fire envelop him, wrapping him in its searing embrace. With a roar that was as much pain as it was rage, Fuertun launched himself into the air, flames propelling him upward. The agony was intense, burning through every nerve in his body. But he forced himself to rise higher and higher, away from the carnage below. The ground fell away beneath him, the canyon shrinking as he soared into the sky, a comet of fire blazing through the night. The pain was blinding, tearing at his very being, but Fuertun clenched his teeth, pushing through it, willing himself to survive. As he climbed higher, the enemy soldiers below could only watch in stunned silence, their prey slipping through their fingers. Fuertun's last sight of the battlefield was of the flames he had left behind, the smoldering remains of his comrades, and the enemy's forces recoiling in fear. And then the canyon was gone, and Fuertun was alone in the night sky, the flames still burning bright, but the pain was beginning to dull. His mind, too, was beginning to fade, exhaustion overwhelming him as the last of his strength ebbed away. He had escaped, but at what cost? The flames flickered around him as he began to descend, the world below a blur of darkness and fire. And then the flames sputtered, his energy spent. The sky, once lit by his fiery ascent, went dark as Fuertun plummeted back to the earth, his consciousness slipping away with every passing second. But even in the darkness, the fire within him still burned, a flickering ember of defiance that refused to be extinguished.